Geothermal energy has been known and used deep into prehistory, and as long as humans have been sentient, it has carried a religious mystique and reverence. Hot springs and nearby volcanic vents emitting noxious gases allowed a conduit through which humans could be healed by and speak with the gods. Great power contained under the earth was awesome and deadly, but the ancients also recognized that wealth came from the earth, with the presiding Greek god of death, Hades, having the euphemism of Pluton, or the rich, all wealth being generated from crops and mines. In the pursuit of wealth, miners began to notice that the deeper they dug, the hotter the temperature of the earth. Geothermal heating was documented in antiquity, notably in Roman baths. The first geothermal power project came in 1904 in Tuscany, which produced 4 kilowatts. The petroleum industry first discovered that temperatures relevant to power production could be accessed from the surface. Today, geothermal electricity production represents roughly 0.5% of the global total. Geothermal power generates heat and energy by producing steam or water from aquifers heated by the Earth's crust contained in permeable reservoirs. Geothermal power has several advantages over other renewable power sources, including among the lowest life cycle carbon emissions and, most importantly, producing continuously, making it perfect for baseload power. Conventional geothermal power will never be a globally significant source of power because of the limited number of permeable water-bearing formations and volcanically active areas. To overcome this disadvantage, enhanced geothermal systems, or EGS, produce geothermal energy from impermeable rock through multi-stage hydraulic fracturing. Enhanced geothermal systems use an injection production well doublet connected subsurface by hydraulic fractures to produce hot fluid. An injection well is drilled into a hot formation, then multi-stage hydraulic fracturing is used to create a fracture network around the injection well. Then a producing well is drilled into the fracture network and perforated. EGS started as a program called Hot Dry Rock in the 1970s by scientists at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Why did the government lab tasked with nuclear weapons research decide to pursue ubiquitous geothermal power? The answer is older than man's pursuit of wealth. It is showing the world who's got the longest drill. In the wake of Sputnik, the United States was determined to surpass the Soviet Union in every technical area. It was rumored that the Soviets were drilling an ultra-deep hole to study the Earth's mantle, so in 1961 the United States committed to drilling its own ultra-deep hole, called Project Mohole, to study the Moho anomaly where the Earth's crust meets its mantle. From a nuclear rocket program called Dumbo, Los Alamos had developed a method to superheat tungsten using a small nuclear reactor, and the technology was used to create a thermal penetrator called a subterrane that could effectively melt a borehole in the hard, igneous rock close to the Earth's mantle, making it useful for the Mohole project. The appeal of the thermal penetrator for drilling a deep borehole was that it got more efficient as it drilled deeper because of the geothermal gradient. As the subterranean team analyzed the geothermal gradient, they had the idea that the Earth's thermal energy, quote, represents the largest and most broadly distributed supply of directly usable thermal energy accessible to mankind. At the same time, Oak Ridge National Laboratory was performing experiments with a new hydraulic fracturing technology developed by the oil and gas industry to investigate the viability of disposing of radioactive waste underground. The Los Alamos scientists realized the technology could be used to fracture the hot, impermeable basement rock that made up most geothermal resources. In the 70s, the United States got nervous about its energy security and tasked the Atomic Energy Commission with research on alternative energy sources, and the Los Alamos team was given funding. Los Alamos sits on the edge of an ancient volcano called Fallas Caldera, which to this day hosts hot springs and volcanic vents. They chose a nearby site called Fenton Hill and began their research. The first experiment was an injection well with 2 production wells on either side with the assumption that perfect planar fractures would emanate symmetrically in the direction of minimum principal stress. This optimism was in part because of, quote, service companies who were very optimistic concerning their abilities to drill, complete, and fracture a hole that none had ever before attempted. They quickly found that the rock was not homogeneous and the exact direction the fracture would form was hard to predict. Sometimes fractures would form in unpredictable directions and healed natural fracture networks would reopen. After several attempts to establish conductivity, the producing well was re-drilled because it did not intersect with the fractures emanating from the injection well. In phase 2, the producing wells were drilled after fracturing and were landed using microseismic data. The project operated until 1995 and demonstrated the technical feasibility of enhanced geothermal power up to 10 megawatts. The main finding of Fenton Hill was that fractures are hard to predict and the producing well should be drilled after the fractures are formed. Since the 70s, roughly a dozen EGS projects have been completed, mostly for technology demonstration. In 2023, Fervo Energy completed the first horizontal well doublet in Blue Mountain, Nevada. Fervo drilled a horizontal injection well, which was fractured, followed by a horizontal production well drilled through the fracture network and fractured itself. Fervo was able to produce a stimulated reservoir volume of 1/4 of a cubic kilometer with a reservoir transmissibility 7 times higher than the best known EGS reservoir, showing high connectivity between the injector and producer wells. The Fervo project is adjacent to a conventional geothermal project that failed due to low permeability in the reservoir. Fervo is now supplying steam to the power plant from the failed project, which generates 3.5 megawatts of commercial power that supplies Google's data center in Reno. They've also demonstrated the ability to store power by pressuring up the reservoir and producing the excess fluid later, which could help load balancing from intermittent power sources. Despite the technical feasibility of EGS, significant economic hurdles exist. Fluid flows asymmetrically through the lowest permeability fractures that connect the two wells, and since the fracture pattern is roughly symmetric, the majority of the reservoir is unproductive. Since no EGS is operated for very long, unforeseen life cycle challenges will surely be discovered. Despite the challenges, Fervo's commercial EGS plant is operating today. Fervo has secured additional funding and has drilled 6 more horizontal wells in Utah near the Department of Energy's enhanced geothermal test site called Forge, with plans to drill 23 more to supply its planned 400 megawatt power plant, securing the future of EGS for decades to come.